Kia ora koutou. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Olivier. I'm a freshwater scientist. I'm based in Wellington. Work for a small consultancy called Traverse Environmental. We do a lot of stuff around RMA processes and freshwater and policy development and that sort of stuff. But for the last 2 or 3 years, I've had, privilege of leading this research program for our land and water, which is about monitoring freshwater improvement. This is about how do we measure whether we are making progress or not. And what I'm here, I will also talk about, it was interesting, there were a few questions on that before, but another project about community-based monitoring framework that is just being finished as we speak. So I'll just show a little bit of that as well because it meshes quite well. So I guess the context for all this work, we've been talking about it, we have to maintain or improve freshwater everywhere. Where we have to improve it, we have to set water quality targets, we have to set timelines, and we have to set management actions to meet those targets. That's under the current NPS, of course. Who knows what's going to happen? But anyway, at the moment, councils, collectively, we have to report on progress towards those targets or on success, whether we've achieved them or not. We also have to record actions and management actions undertaken in the catchment. All that is in the context of all this investment in money, in terms of time, of mahi, in restoring freshwater. There's also been a big push of community-based restoration and monitoring. So this is kind of the context. And within that, how do we detect freshwater improvement? How do we know whether all this investment is actually delivering outcomes, not just outputs? And also the other question is, how do we empower communities to undertake freshwater monitoring and robust, fit-for-purpose freshwater monitoring? So I'll start with the first one, which was really the main focus, which is going to be the main focus of my talk, which is how we detect improvement that result from land management actions. So a problem statement really is that in spite of all this investment, quite often we don't have dedicated effectiveness monitoring built into either the planning instruments, regional plans, or into sort of catchment scale restoration projects. We tend to rely and hope that the existing monitoring networks are going to be able to answer that question. Are we making a difference at a catchment scale? But the problem is those networks have been designed for other purposes, which has served quite well, but the monitoring site may not be at the right place, or the monitoring frequency may not be sufficient to detect the specific change that we want to be able to measure. And as a result, we actually have limited evidence. Rich showed some this morning that land mitigations work at the catchment scale. But this is actually quite unique. There's very heavily studied catchments, but we don't actually have a lot of evidential basis that we are making a difference. And that's really, that's been a bit of a problem. So this research program was set out to try and develop some tools to support the design of monitoring plan with that specific purpose in mind, which is monitoring change and improvement. We're doing this using both biophysical and cultural indicators for rivers, lakes, and groundwater, so quite a wide scope. Assembling some information on monitoring technologies and associated costs. And this was this program that just concluded in December. We're still kind of dealing with the dregs, but it's about 2.5, 3 years, 2.4 mil. So that was the program itself. In today's presentation, I'm going to focus not on how we did all the research and the modeling and the analysis. I'm going to focus on demonstrating how we made this information available to users through a series of web apps. And I'm also going to focus on the biophysical monitoring components because those have a national scale. We looked at the cultural monitoring components through 2 case study catchments. And if you're interested in those aspects, which I won't have time to talk about today, I'm also not the best person to do that. Best to contact Joanne Clapcott or just talk to me after this. Right, key principles. Why are we doing this? Why are we bothering about this? Is that detecting water quality changes is tricky because it keeps changing. Again, usefully, Rich talked a bit about it this morning, is that water quality keeps changing all the time as a result of hydrology, as a result of season, biological activity on a daily, sub-daily, hourly basis. It just keeps going up and down. And so it's very variable, it's very noisy data. It also changes in the longer term in response to climate and, of course, to human activities. And this is the bit that we're really interested in, is the human activity bit. But how do we separate it from the rest? And samples we take, this is monthly samples, but imagine that between two dots there's actually a whole bunch of wriggles. Because during that month there would have been rainfall events, there would have been biological activity. So detecting change in all that noise is difficult. And essentially, the more samples we collect during a period of time, the more data density we have there, the more likely we are to be able to conclude, yes, it's gone up, or no, it's gone down, or yes, it's gone down. And there are some statistical methods called power analysis that allow us to estimate the density of data we need, both in terms of number of samples and when they're taken, to detect trends over time. So there's power analysis essentially. I won't go into the detail, but essentially what they do is they link three things: the likelihood of detecting the change, which is the power, the size of that change, and the amount of data we have during that time period. And we undertook that analysis at every existing monitoring site on rivers, lakes, and groundwater, and then that was extrapolated to all unmonitored lakes and rivers. And this was done for all water quality and ecological attributes that we could get data on. So if you imagine there's 130,000 stream segments, 15 attributes, many combinations. So we've got a whole amount of analysis that was done. It's great material for a paper which was published, but how do we make it useful? How do we make it accessible? And I guess that there was one of the challenges we had in this program. So I'm going to just jump online and show live the web apps and the resources we've developed. They are all on the website. But just first, just to provide some visual guidance as to what you're going to see. They're going to see a bunch of things, but quite often the likelihood of detecting a change is color-coded. What we're aiming for is that sort of dark brown color. I know we could have chosen a better color scheme, but anyway, that sort of dark brown. With this, we're likely to detect the change. That red color, this moderate way, yeah, you might detect the change, but it's not certain. And below 60%, essentially, it's unlikely that you'll be able to detect the change that you're looking for. So this is our website, and I hope it's going to work. I'm going to exit this and go online into our, not this one, and here. Oh, look at that, it works. So this is the website that we've developed that is directly associated with this project. It's called Monitoring Freshwater Improvements. At the top there, you've got a bunch of pages, a home page that explains the program, the web app, and I'll delve into that. All the resources and examples we developed around cultural monitoring, our case studies. One of them was not far from here in the Pokai Whenua catchment, which is between Putaruru and Tokoroa in the south. Some monitoring fact sheets and all supporting research, who's done it, that sort of things. So I'll jump into the web app here. So this is a page where you see a bunch of information at the front that explains what we've done and why we've done it. Here you can download a user guide. That's a step-by-step guide. So don't worry too much if I go too fast. There's a step-by-step guide in here that can be downloaded. We also at the moment developing videos, like tutorials through video to be able to use it more directly. And as you come down here, there's three dashboards. One is called Rivers, Lakes, and Groundwater. So start with the rivers here. And at the top here, there's a bunch of what we call modules. And each one of them interrogate that massive data set that we developed in different ways and spatially explicit way. So I'll start with this one. So this one is called Water Quality at Monitoring Site. What it allows you to do is explore the likelihood of detecting an improvement in water quality that is user-specified at existing monitoring sites. And this really we developed for, it's in response to some regional council questions, particularly when I said, is our monitoring system at the moment suitable to detect changes that correspond to our freshwater planning targets, for example. So I'll just zoom in because it's local. I'll zoom in onto the Pokai Whenua catchment here. So you can click on any of the catchments. The app will display the stream network, and the black dots here are the various monitoring sites. As you go in, you can click in and select. You've got a drop-down menu here that allows you to select a water quality indicator that you might be interested in. Let's go for visual clarity, which is the attribute in the NPS that's associated with sediment. And here I can assign manually at each one of the 3 monitoring sites a size of improvement I want to measure. So we've set 25% arbitrarily as a default, but you just go in there. Oh, I'm going to drop my mouse. Hey, that's the beauty of doing things live, right? So 20. So I'm just going to set it to 20%, for example, here. And then you go to the third step of the app, which allows you to select and set various combinations of sampling duration and sampling frequency. So here we're talking about potentially assessing the monitoring network around regional plan targets. I'm going to set 10 years as the typical sort of plan timeline, and keep the frequency at monthly for now, because this is what is currently being done. And then you can go and click on any of the monitoring sites. Gives you the site name, gives you the improvement that you have nominated, or I have nominated here, of 20%, and gives me the likelihood of detecting that reasonably small improvement of 20% with 10 years of monthly data is actually quite low, as 25%. So that means that if we are really targeting a modest improvement of 20% at that site of water clarity, we are going to have to ramp up the monitoring frequency to potentially fortnightly, potentially in this case weekly, before we get to a high likelihood of detecting that change of 80%. So this is just one example. It is specific to the indicator, but it's also specific to the size of the change. So if I go in there and change the size and put 40%, so this is a large improvement, then actually to detect a 40% improvement within 10 years, well, actually you find that at this site, monthly data is actually suitable. So this gives you various ways to have combinations, and we've actually turned this into a separate module which does exactly this, allows you to interrogate your monitoring network. Again, select your catchment, select your indicator. I'm going to stick with visual clarity. 80% of detection power, which is our gold standard for change detection. And I'm going to take 10 years of monthly data, and then you can interrogate your sites there. The minimum detectable improvement at this site is 39%. So if you are going to have a less than 40% improvement at that site, it's unlikely that you're going to detect it with the current monitoring system within 10 years. So this kind of gets us to guide you indicator by indicator and change by change as to the frequency of monitoring at existing sites. Allows councils maybe to set expectations as to what we might be able to detect and what we won't be able to detect. But also what it does is it pushes us towards, okay, if we're going to do higher frequency monitoring, who's going to do that, how much it's going to cost, and what technology we're going to use. So I'll come back to that. But for now, just showing another couple of modules here. One is called land mitigation. So in this, if you remember what Rich McDowell was showing earlier on, those farm types and the mitigations that were built into those farm types and the improvements that may be achievable with maximum mitigation within each one of those farm types. So this is what we've built into this layer here. So selected my catchment, I've gone back to the Pokai Whenua, and then I can select my contaminant. I'll just go to nitrogen, and here what we've built is that layer that Rich was showing before, and all those land use types are in there, and I can click on one. This is that weird name of dairy farm, but what is relevant to here is that the predicted improvement with maximum mitigation is about 32%. That's a reduction in the losses of nitrate from that farm system. So it's a reduction at source, not in the river. And this is available for all forms of land cover and land use where we didn't have this farm type data from our land and water previous work. We've just used default values from the literature The value of this is just to demonstrate how the app reacts to this. So if I click on this, which is all this part here of the catchment is actually forestry. Here we've assumed that forestry would have no improvement of nitrate losses through mitigations, for example. But those are assumptions, they can be changed. Now, the next thing that the model does, once it's done that, is that it can predict the resulting in-river improvements that result from all that mosaic of improvement across the catchment. So if you go up there at the top on that little layer icon and remove land cover and put, oops, missed it, sorry, and click on rivers, what appears here on the screen is that now you can click on any stream reach and it predicts the improvement, so the reduction in median nitrate nitrogen in river this time, that results from all that mosaic of improvement across the catchment. And here, the bottom of the catchment is 35%. So this is what we might hope to achieve with maximum mitigations. And we're not saying those mitigations should happen, would happen, will happen. All this need to be defined by the user. We've just put those as default, just for demonstration and so people can start using it. And here you can use this cursor to set your default level of mitigation for the whole catchment. So you can kind of ratchet down saying, oh, those mitigations are a bit crazy. Actually, we're going to do only a third of them. So if you do a third of them, and I click back on that bottom of the catchment, well, it's about 10% improvement this time. So this is kind of a broad scale reduction in the level of mitigation in the catchment. And then how that links with monitoring design, if I go into this app here, which is called the Water Quality Catchment app, oops, sorry, I can again go back to my favorite Pourquoi-Fennois catchment. And what we did here, so imagine the app in the background has that layer of land mitigations, but you have here the option to customize it. And so there was one of our case studies. I want to acknowledge the Pourquoi-Fennois Trust. We have helped us through this. We've actually created a customized layer of land mitigation here. Essentially, they said, okay, within the next 10 years, we'd be comfortable doing this sort of stuff, but not all that sort of stuff. So we've created that layer with them from that. And what we've done then is we can then, once you do this, you can upload that layer into the app. Click Process Improvements. And now we've got, there we go, the catchment specific, an example specific layer that's been uploaded onto the web app. And if I go into and select nitrate nitrogen as my indicator of interest, now what the app has done, it's populated that whole stream network with predicted improvements as a result of that specified mitigation layer. So, oops, I should look at this part. Yeah, there we go. So now at the bottom of the catchment, actually at our bottom of catchment monitoring site, the predicted improvement is about 9%. As luck would have it, this is about the plan change, the Waikato plan change 1 10-year target, improvement target for this catchment. So that's actually quite lucky. So now that we've done all this, we can interrogate the app as to how we monitor this. And in this situation, at this monitoring site, again, I can play with my various levels of sampling duration and sampling frequency. And to detect that change at this site, we need at least fortnightly data for 10 years to detect that 9% improvement. But if you look at other parts of the catchment, the catchments that are in forestry, well, guess what? We assume that there'll be no improvement. So the model says there'll be no improvement, so you're not going to detect it. But the other monitoring sites towards the top of the catchment here might need a lot more monitoring, so more like bi-weekly monitoring for the Mangamingi site, for example, to be able to detect that change. And again, that leads to the question, who's going to do this monitoring? How much is it going to cost? What technologies might be available? Before I move to that, there are a bunch of other modules there that do different things. I won't probably have time to go through them all today, but we've got the same concept for ecological indicators We also have a really cool module here that talks about contaminant loads that happen during high flow in rivers. And we have equivalent web apps for lakes and for groundwater. So again, this is all described in the user guide and into the website. So hopefully that's given you an appetizer of what those web apps can do. But where I wanted to go next is those monitoring fact sheets. So again, linking to the question of how we do this monitoring and how much is it going to cost. So going back to fact sheets, we've developed for every indicator that's used in the web apps, we've developed a fact sheet that you can download for free, and it has a plain English summary of what is the indicator, why we care about it, why we want to monitor it, and also what are the technologies available to measure, in this case, nitrate. So for nitrate, we've got high frequency sensors available. And then we've assembled from 4 regional councils across the country what we hope are kind of true costs of running those monitoring programs when you just go there and take samples, or when you run a nitrate sensor, including CapEx and OpEx. And this is all the way to having a usable data set at the end of the process. So in the case of nitrate here, we've tried to assemble this into cost curves that give you comparative costs for, say, monthly sampling, that bottom line here, fortnightly sampling, weekly, twice weekly, and the blue broken line here is the high frequency sampling, so that's putting a sensor in place, and the orange line here is the cost associated with deploying a sensor but not buying it. So it's all the OpEx associated with the sensor, which, by and large is comparable to fortnightly discrete sampling, but gives you a hell of a lot more data. So those are kind of some of the resources that are available on this website. Oops, this is Katie's presentation. So I'm going to go back to my presentation, and go back to that question of who's going to do the monitoring. If we're going to do weekly, daily monitoring, who's going to do it? So we've got technological options, but we might have the option of actually using more community-based monitoring and using that amazing resource that's out there of people being keen to undertake monitoring and know more about their own catchment. And this is that project that I wanted to present about. It's on behalf of my colleague Juliette, and this is an EnviroLink project. So it's held by the regional councils, and there's a whole bunch of parties that are involved, and there's some more follow-up work with the Y Connection and the Landcare Trust and so on and so forth. So, but what I wanted to just show you briefly, for those who haven't seen this project, is why was it done? It's simply because the community-based monitoring continues to grow. It has that real potential to empower communities to meaningfully understand and participate in freshwater management. And this map here, this is the Rangitiki Rivers Catchment Collective. And when you look at the map, the orange dots here are all the existing regional council monitoring sites, and the green dots are all the community-based monitoring sites that have been monitored for the last 4 years, I think. And last count, I think there were around 80 odd sites that have been monitored monthly for the last 3 or 4 years. And just taking time to reflect on the power of this data set in terms of spatial density of data, and how, if this data is good enough to go into catchment models, the real power of this data is to inform all this management at a scale we could not do with just the regional council data. It's not a criticism of regional council. This is actually a high density monitoring network, regional monitoring network in that part of the world. But even then, this is multiplied by 3 or 4. So it's just to illustrate the potential power of community-based monitoring. But at the moment, its full value is not being realized. We've had many examples where parties do not want to use community-based data sets because they don't know where it's from, they don't know the quality of it, there's no traceability, and it's intensely frustrating. I guess that's the best way to describe it for everyone, that the data cannot be used. This project it's such a good project. It is, the idea there is to have a framework to allow community groups to develop fit-for-purpose community-based monitoring program, freshwater monitoring programs. It's based on streams. It provides a whole bunch of resources. They're all very much user focused. And the fundamental reason for it is that when you look at community-based monitoring, the first thing to look at probably is why we want to do the monitoring. If we want to do it for engagement and education, well, that's one thing. We can do qualitative monitoring, and this has huge value in itself. If we want to start using the data into investigation, surveillance, into informing catchment models, or if we want to use the data to inform regulatory processes, actually presenting the data in court, for example, then the kind of the quantitative aspect of the data set and the quality control, quality assurance aspects of the data set need to increase accordingly. And it's all about recording what's been done and why. And the hope is by going through this process, we can have data sets that are fit for the purpose that the community group decides on, really, not something else, something that they can decide on. And the whole framework is designed to do exactly that. First, you plan, you look at establishing the why. What do you want to do the monitoring? What do you want to use the data for? Then the what, the where, the how, the when, and the who. So this is, the actual monitoring project, the actual methods are going to be put in place. And really importantly, this is all the quality control and quality assurance requirements, training, quality checks, where the data is going to go, traceability, all these sort of things. So the guidance manual has got a whole bunch of resources. I won't go through it. Where's Mark? I don't know if I'm going. How am I going for time, Mark?
You have got 7 minutes and 33, 2, 1 seconds to go.
That's awesome, thank you. All right, I'll go through this quickly because there's another thing I was quite keen to show you guys. So there's a bunch of resources that are there that are designed to guide monitoring, community groups through developing this monitoring program. There's stuff around methods and what method is suitable to what purpose. But also there's some field forms that are available for data collection. So the data is actually collected within boundaries, within quality boundaries. There's a whole bunch of forms. I won't go through them there, but they're designed to provide that kind of ability to record how the field data is monitored, what parameters are going to be sent to the lab, that sort of things, what observations are being made on site, and so on and so forth. So as much as possible, boundaries have been set in this to make sure that the data is within sensible bounds. So there's a bunch of alert things that say, oh, hang on, no, you can't have this for this value, it doesn't make sense, that sort of things. So just the last word on those two projects. First is that freshwater monitoring is critical to managing the resource. If we don't know how we're doing, whether we are improving or not, how are we going to resource? We need that feedback loop into our management actions. And I'll also say that measuring the actions themselves is also critically important. If we don't know what we've done or what we're going to do, we can't link it to any form of outcome in the river or in the lake. Existing monitoring programs are great. They won't answer all questions though. And what we're finding through this program is that if you have a specific mitigation plan in mind, it pays to actually look at specific monitoring to prove whether that mitigation has worked or not. So it needs to be at a scale and at a frequency and location that actually is likely to detect the change that you're trying to achieve. One issue, though, is that there are some significant potential additional costs associated with effectiveness monitoring because we need, in many places, probably more monitoring than what we're currently doing. So I guess this is a bit to challenge the status quo. We're not going to monitor everything everywhere all the time, so we need to prioritize effort at selected sites, maybe demonstration sites where we've got a clear mitigation plan and do a lot of monitoring effort there. We can also use new monitoring technologies, and hopefully those keep coming along, getting cheaper and cheaper, so we can do more and more of that. But a lot of them are not really quite at that point yet, so we still have that blockage there. And another option is to use community-based monitoring. Again, if we can get this data to a level where we're all comfortable using it, there's massive power to harness there and to inform all that freshwater management at the catchment scale. How much time do I have left, Mark? Just acknowledging the team was actually done the work. I only talk about those things.
508, 507, 507.
All right, excellent. This is great. I can show you very quickly another cool little resource that we are just developing. So I wasn't going to show it, and then it's not ready. Please, this is really the beta version, so the graphics are terrible, but we are working on it. But the reason why I want to show this, it was relevant to a lot of conversations this morning. This is a scenario builder that's available for every existing monitoring site in the country. So you can click, that gives you a whole bunch of monitoring sites. I'm going to click on one of those catchments in the Manawatu and the Pohangina catchment, the Mangatainoka catchment. So you select the catchment, you select the monitoring site. The app delineates the surface water catchment that's above that monitoring site. And then you select your indicator. Here I'm going to select nitrate, nitrogen. We've just stuck to nutrients for now. What the app shows you quickly, it shows you by main land use category, dairy, exotic forest, native vegetation, so on and so forth, the current cover by land area in the catchment. So in this catchment, we've got 20% of native vegetation, 35% of dairy, 45% of sheep and beef. The next column there to the right shows you the estimated current load contribution to the monitoring site from each one of those land cover of nitrate, nitrogen loads. So it tells us that about 72% of the nitrate measured at that monitoring site is coming from dairy and so on and so forth. Down here, it gives you the various bands. Those are going to be translated into graphics, so please ignore that blue part here. This is going to change. It gives you the current NPSFM bands. It also gives you an estimate of the reference or natural conditions at that site. So what we would expect under complete natural cover, what you could actually see there. So this is kind of a hard thing. You're never going to get past this. You're never going to get better than this. So that's why we've put it there. And it gives you the current median concentration, which is at this site is 0.877. What you can then do, this column here, which is called land mitigation, is again the same farm type based full mitigation, every known mitigation action in the world implemented on those farms might result on average in a 44% reduction in nitrogen losses from dairy farm, 18% from sheep and beef farms within the farm types available in this catchment. So I can just click and go and calculate new loads, it says here. And what it tells me here, don't know if it's big enough, but down here, it shows me the outcome of this mitigation at the catchment scale. It shows that if we apply all those really hard mitigations, might improve median nitrate concentration from 0.87 to 0.56. Which is a significant improvement, but it's still a long way from the regional plan target for this site, which is 0.4. And then what you can do is then play with both the land mitigation. So I can change this and say, we're never going to mitigate to that level, so we're going to keep it at 20%. But then you can also play with your land use composition in the catchment. So let's say I'm going to, and I'm not saying this is what should happen, let's be clear, but you can. And this is an exploratory tool. This is to allow people to see, quantify the size of the mitigation, the size of the land use changes that correspond to a certain water quality improvement. This is not to say anything should happen. It is just to help people quantify things. So here I've taken 15% of the dairy farm off and I've put them into exotic forest. I can also take some of the say 20% of the sheep and beef and put it into native vegetation. Oops. There we go, 40%. Calculate load and concentrations, and then the app automatically calculates, oops, if I go there. Now it tells me that, with that little scenario I've played with, that the output is 0.45. So, just to conclude, why we've done this is simply because we've seen so many times in the last 10 to 15 years, regional planning, freshwater planning processes end up with very aspirational water quality targets, but not necessarily the quantification of the mitigations or the land use changes that might correspond to those. And there's a bit of hypocrisy built into some of those planning instruments that we haven't really looked at how hard it is. And this is just a way to make this information more publicly available. So this is going to be open source, publicly available for anyone to use. This is broad scale, but we're hoping that it will help people quantify a bit more how you actually get somewhere, or what might actually be achievable rather than be always very aspirational and within certain timelines. So, and I'll just conclude on that. Thank you.
I know that we've